All right, now we're continuing in the book Torah, which was written by the first Rebbe of Chabad, explaining what is God and how we Jewish people can serve him by improving the world and convincing the whole world to serve their creator, and how to do it. Okay, so here, the Rebbe, if you remember yesterday, so the Rebbe began this Hasidic discourse by asking a question in the Torah. And the Torah is, one second, one second, I went too far here. One moment, there. Okay, no, what am I doing? We have gone again, we've overstepped the boundaries here. Yes, we were in the right place in the beginning. We're Parshas Vayakhel. And the Rebbe asked a question in Vayakhel. Why is it that in this week's Torah portion, it starts off with Shabbat? There we go. Oh, I knew it. It says, why does it start over here? Shabbat. Shabbat. And then it's the opposite of what it was in Truma. In Parshat Truma, which is 3 weeks ago, when God started telling Moses about the commandments of making the tabernacle, as over there he said, first of all, how to make the vessels of the tabernacle, and then how to make the actual building of the tabernacle. And then afterwards, he talked about Shabbat. And here in our Torah portion, it starts off with Shabbat first. First of all, right? It starts off with Shabbat. That's here. It starts off, first of all, with Shabbat. And then afterwards, it tells them about how to make the tent. And then afterwards, it tells about how to make the vessels. So in other words, it basically changes the place of the vessels in Shabbat. Over there, when God is talking to Moses, he says, first of all, make the vessels. And the last thing he tells them about is Shabbat. And here in this week's Torah portion, when Moses tells over to the Jewish people what to do, so it says, and he tells them the same thing, but he starts off with Shabbat. That which God told him last back then, Moses says first over here, and that which God told him first back then, Moses tells the Jewish people last over here. Okay, so what? So let's understand, we have to understand what is God. Let's understand what is God. What is this God of the Jews? What's the message of the Jewish people to the world? What's wrong with all the other religions? What's the problem? What's the problem with all the other religions? Why do we insist, the Jewish people insist, that everyone has to worship one God? Now, we do not in any way want everyone to be Jews. Everyone is not created to be Jews. We Jewish people, we want everybody to be what they were created to be, right? What they were created to be. No one was created to be one of the other religions, whatever it is, Hindu or Christian or Muslim. They adapted these religions. They adapted them. A person can change his religion, but a Jew can never change his identity. He can change what he does, he can change what he thinks, he can get whatever he wants to do, he can become the head of another religion. But nevertheless, if he's a Jew, he is a Jew. And even if he was born a non-Jew, if it's a convert, we say a convert has a Jewish soul. So what is this thing of a Jew? A Jew is a person that has this feeling of God, a feeling, not a spiritual feeling, we talked about this before, a feeling of God, and even more, he wants to do what God wants him to do. That's a Jew. Every Jew, male, female, man, woman, child, ignorant or not, aware that he's Jewish or not, wants deep down to do what God wants him to do. Right? Like every human being wants to be human. There are aberrations. There are human beings that want to murder and they want to do terrible things, but that's not a human, that's animal. A human being naturally will follow his natural traits. He doesn't want to be an animal, doesn't want to be a plant. That's the way people are. Humans. A Jew wants to be a Jew. What is a Jew? A Jew is a person that feels God. What is God? Here we go. What is God? So when the Jewish people have this feeling of God. So they want everyone to worship God. Why? Because God is creating everyone. Everyone is being created by God. How do you know you're being created by God? Are you alive? Huh? You're alive? If you're not alive, then you have no business watching this video. You can't watch the video because you're not alive. Right? So if so, who am I talking to? Obviously, you must be alive if you're watching this. And if you're alive, then your life is the signature of God. Just like a Picasso painting has a signature on it. And there's people that can forge the signatures, but God's signature cannot be forged. If you're alive, that is God's signature. No one else is going to give you life. There can't be a fake signature. You are a creation of God. Every single human being is a creation of God. Every animal is also a creation of God, but they can't return gratitude to their creator. So every human being is a creation of God. And the Jewish people just want everyone to, how do you say, react properly, to have, don't be an ingrate, word like that, ingrate. God is creating you, he's giving you life. Don't give loyalty or thanks or prayer to anything else, to some spirit or the son of God or the bubby of God or there's God's uncle or something. Don't. God is your creator. You're a creator. He's also my creator. But he's not creating you in the virtue that he's creating me. Everyone has their own virtue. Everyone is unique. Everyone is special. No one is expendable. Everyone has something unique to contribute to the whole world. Everyone has something to teach the whole world, and everyone has to learn from everybody else in the world. So we said this so many times. Everyone is superior to everybody else, and everyone is inferior to everybody else, because everybody has something unique to teach everyone. But on the other hand, you have to learn from everybody. How many people are in the world? 8 billion, 9 billion people in the world. So you have 9 billion lessons to learn. From everybody. And they don't have to be big lessons in university that you're going to get tested and things like that. They say that life is the opposite of university. Ever heard this before? Life is the opposite of university. In university, first of all, you get the lessons, and then after that, they get the test. In life, first of all, there's the tests, and then you learn the lesson. So life has experience for everybody. Everybody is unique. And who is giving you these unique lessons? God. And then we want everyone in the world to recognize their creator. That's all. And when that happens, that's what Moshiach is going to do. And then everyone will drop all of their religions. They'll realize that the religions are big lies, which they are, and that they're totally unnecessary, and that it's simply ingratitude to the creator of the universe. Let's go. So who is God? What is God? Where is God? So there's a famous statement by the Rebbe of Kutsk. They said, where is God? He said, wherever you let him in. Wherever you let him in. So here we go. They said, someone else asked him, they said, where is God? He said, where is God not? The Rebbe of Kutsk. Okay, so what is God? So first of all, it says God, one big thing about God is that God never changes. How is it can be God never changes? He creates the world all the time. Everything is coming from him. He's enlivening everybody, and he doesn't change. How can it be? So it says, because very simply, we don't know what real reality is. What we think is real reality is just a ray of godliness. To the degree that we say that this world is really made from nothing. God is making the world from nothing. So it means you're nothing. And not only are you nothing, but even I'm nothing. It's not hard for me to believe that you're nothing, but it's very difficult for me to accept the fact that I am nothing. But Hasidut explains to us that it's true. So if I'm nothing, how am I here? So the answer is it's a miracle. Everything is a miracle. If you are listening to this program, to this video, you are a miracle. Your eyes are miracles. Your nose is a miracle. Your ear is a miracle. We have to be grateful for this amazing miracle, which is called me. Everyone says it to yourself. And I'm grateful to the miracle that's called you, and you have to be. Says the Rebbe, therefore the world is created, it's called from God's, what's called God's kingship, the lowest of God's 10 aspects. there's two different ways of looking at this, two different ways of looking. There's what's called God is surrounding all the worlds, and that he fills all the worlds. He fills all the worlds means how everything is different. He surrounds all the worlds means that everything exists. It all has existence. It's the same thing. How it exists, that's called how God fills the world. That everything exists, that's called surrounding the world. An aspect of God called Soviv calling. Because from this aspect of God's kingship is drawn down the light and the life force also in these two levels, which are called Soviv calling, how God surrounds the worlds and how God fills the worlds. Hainu Shaliyot ki bechinas malchus, because this aspect, which we call God, is a king, who also bechinas gam kein bechinas ein sof mamish. This is infinite. God creates the world, but God is infinite. When we say infinite, it means that he is not a creation. He's not limited in any way. He's also not limited to being unlimited. Right? The God is not limited to being godly. What is it? What's God? Or is God something way up there? It's just infinitely far away. Maybe he created the world, 1,000 years ago, a billion years ago, a trillion years ago. We say no, that God is infinite. He is not limited in any way, but he is also not limited to being unlimited. God can also be limited, and that's how he creates the world. That's what's called God's kingship. God's kingship, or God's mouth, that also creates the world. But that aspect of God, which is limited, so to speak, and he creates the world, that's also unlimited. It's Ein Sof. That's what it means, or Ein Sof. That's what we call God. Or Ein Sof, the infinite light of God. Another name for God is Or Ein Sof. Or Ein Sof. That's mentioned in Kabbalah books. Ki. Or this idea of God's light, this is Giloi, revelation. Hamshacha, and drawing down from God's essence. We can note it like it's known, Shashemesh Atzmo, called Ma'or. That the sun itself is not called light, it is called the source of light, Me'or, the illuminator of or, but the illumination light is just a ziv, it's just a ray, which is drawn from the Me'or, from the illuminator, which is the sun. What's it got to do with the sun? We're saying that God is something like the sun. The sun just shines out light. God shines creation. And the sun shines onto the earth and those who live on it. Kach also or Ein Sof. Also, the infinite light of God is something like the array of, is something like a ray of the sun. And it shines, that God shines to the earth. Did I make a mistake over? No. All right, so this is V'kach bechinas or Ein Sof, and also God's infinite light. Hu al derech mashal is something like a ray which is drawn down mi mehuto vatzmuto, abbreviation, from God's essence, right? Just like a ray is drawn down from the light of the sun, so does this power of creation, which God creates everything, and how he creates everything, this is drawn down from God's essence. But on God's essence, lo shayach chlal, it is not relevant that we can say it shines, or it is emanated, or it is revealed. Why? Because it's too real. It's too real. Or who gam ken bechinas Ein Sof, because the light is also infinite, right? God, there was God's essence, and then God's light. And God's light, that's the force that creates the worlds and articulates the worlds, makes different worlds and different creations and everything. But this light is also called Ein Sof, infinite. Because this light of God is infinite, and therefore it is impossible for the worlds to receive it inside Ha'or Shaloyit Batel Metziut, so that they will not be negated. So God is creating the world, from this aspect of his light, not from his essence. He's creating the world from his light, but this also light is also infinite. It's impossible for the world to accept it. Therefore, one aspect, the main aspect of this light of God is what's called surrounding the worlds. But by means of this fact that God is able to contract and conceal and articulate this light. I like that word, articulate. Nice word. This light. There is drawn down a very contracted and, how do you want to call it, manipulated? I don't want to use the word articulated too much. I get addicted to use this word too much. Me'aor liot mitlabish betocha olamot, to be in the worlds. It's called mamalik olam. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about God, right? God. Now we have no idea what God is, but we do know that God is creating us. So a little bit of that. I mean, here I am. Here you are. So we're being created by God. How are we being created by God? So you figure, well, God must be something like me. It's probably like a big angel or something like this. No. Ah. That is blasphemy. God is not like us. God creates us. Yeah, but it says in the Bible that we're created in God's image. So what does that mean? It says, yeah, that's right. I almost forgot. That's like the lowest aspect of God, how God already hides himself a billion times, and it's still God. Still God. God is still creating. It's a pretty big miracle. Here we are. We're being created, right? But this comes from a reflection of a contraction, of a concealment of the essence of God. But nevertheless, it makes us. And even more, this ray and this we're so unreal, but believe it or not, we affect the essence of God. We affect the essence of God. That's why God made this whole business, so that we would be down here in this incredible darkness that we have absolutely no idea what we're even talking about over here, right? And we're working with these Kabbalistic ideas, and just because the Rebbe knows what he's talking about, we don't know what he's talking about, but we know we're here we are, and we have life, and we don't understand what it is. And the Torah does say that we're created in God's image, and it says that God created the world, and the Chassidut teaches us that God creates the world all the time. So we have to know something about God. So the Rebbe says, what we know about God is how incredibly distant God is from any comprehension whatsoever, but how incredibly important we are. God made this whole business for me and you. And when we do what we're supposed to, and we act properly in this incredible darkness that we're in, as it can actually affect God. That's right. That's what Chassidus said, that we have an effect on God. And we can bring blessing into the world. We can change the world by our trust in God and our actions and our thought and our speech, etc. But that we're going to get to. I just sort of skipped ahead so you don't feel too insignificant. Right? Exactly the opposite. We are incredibly significant. We are connected to the essence of God. This whole big plan was not made by God as a trick, so he can just watch us running around in this maze like rats and something like that. No, it's not. This is tremendously important. It affects the essence of God, and that's why God gave the Torah. The Torah tell us how important we are. Well, let's go. Now we can understand why the Makubalim, the Kabbalists, say that this drawing down of light of God is called light. And that's why it's called Or Ein Sof. And also in the Tanya, in chapter 48, it talks about this God's surrounding light is called also a ray of godliness. Agam, even though Sheish Harbatamim, even though there's a lot of reasons why it's called light, but one of the reasons is this. Hainu, namely, ki it's just like in physical world. There is a ray, like a ray of the sunlight on something. Hine Hari Aziv, this ray of sunlight, Hare, behold, Bechinas Makiv, it surrounds that thing. And it doesn't go inside of it. Right? If you're in a dark room, you turn on the light, all of a sudden you see everything. But the light doesn't change anything. it just bounces off of whatever there is and enables you to see it. That's how science explains it now, though maybe they'll explain it a different way tomorrow. But in any case, maybe I just don't understand that they already did explain it a different way. But nevertheless, let's just say that light does not change the thing. It just bounces off and it reveals that thing. Nimsa, so comes out ha'ora, this ray of godliness, it's a revelation from God's concealment. The same thing as God, but of course it's different from God's ray. The ray of godliness, it changes us. It creates us. But still it creates us in a way that it, so to speak, encompasses us. We have no idea what it does. We do not internalize this light of God, right? God's creating everything and nobody feels it. But nevertheless, this fact that God is creating us, this is a revelation from being concealed. This is a big, how do you say, clue. Our existence is a clue that there is a creator. When there is a cloud, the sun does not shine. And this is a complete concealment. Okay, when this ray of light is drawn down and it shines on the earth and everyone on it, then it's revealed. Similarly with God. This revelation of godliness, it surrounds us. It doesn't go inside of us, it doesn't go inside of the earth. Also, the idea of Or Ein Sof. So we've called him, this aspect of God that surrounds the world. The fact that the world exists, this is a level of revelation in order to keep in existence and to enliven all the worlds. But we don't feel it. It doesn't go inside of us. But before God created the world, God in his name says we're one. God's name was included inside of God, inside of his essence. In other words, there was no creation, it was only in potential. And that's what the rabbis say. Before the world was created, God and his name were alone. Shehu shmo b'chinas levado. That it was God and his name alone. And it was God and his potential to create the world were what was there before the world was created. When was the world created? How long ago? It was not created long ago. Before the world was created, there was no time. Time began when God created the world. So we can't say that the world was created 5,700 whatever years ago. 5,782 years ago, and a half years ago, that's when time began. There was nothing before that. There was no time before that. There was no being before that. There was no vacuum before that. What was there before that? There was pure, want to call it potential? No, potential, that's also a level. It was much more. It was only God and his name was concealed inside of himself, even in a non-potential way. What this means, who knows? But there it was. When God created the world, Nimshach was drawn down to be this level of revelation of God, but it was in a way of surrounding the world. It was in a way that's totally incomprehensible, even to the angels. That's why all the angels are burning up. Nevertheless, this revelation is a surrounding way. It's above understanding, above comprehension. Therefore, it's called a ray of godliness, like a ray of the sun that shines on the world, but the world does not really appreciate it. Right? It doesn't appreciate what it means. It just bounces off the world, etc. I mean, it has its effect on the world, the plants and things like that. What's it called over there? With the there's a word for it. I forgot my biology. Anyway, it's got this chlorophyll, right? Chlorophyll, that's what it's called. Anyway, somehow or other, it processes some of the light, the ability, and that makes things grow. Right? The sunlight. If there's no sunlight, then you're really in bad shape. And then the world's in bad shape. But nevertheless, the sunlight does not go inside of everything. It just hits everything. Same thing, godliness, so to speak, is not comprehended by our mind, even though he's creating us. And so it's just a ray of the sun that comes down. Similarly, it's, so to speak, a ray of godliness that's creating us. And that is creating us in two different ways. One is that it surrounds us above comprehension, and another way is that it is a little bit comprehended, understood. Namely, the form that God creates the world. That's what it says. That's what King David said. Read the book of Psalms. Read the book of Psalms. A lot of the Psalms praise God. That's what we have incorporated in our day-to-day prayers, us religious Jews. The Psalms of King David, praising God. And what's he praising God? He's praising the Creator, and he's praising how the Creator interacts with the creation, how we interact with. That's also the King Solomon, Song of Songs, the Creator. Because that's what it means. That's what it means. I will exalt you, my God, the King. And I will draw down your name forever and ever. Psalm 145. We say it like 4 times a day, was it? And they're supposed to say it at least 3 times a day. Well, the Chior, at first glance, Lashon, it's alphabetical also. Aleph base. Psalm 145, very beautiful. L'chor, at first glance, Lashon, La'olam. What does it mean? I will draw your name down forever and ever. What does it mean forever and ever? It's not understood. I will draw, God, your name forever and ever. What do you mean forever? Forever I will call you. I will draw down your name. How can I draw down God's name forever? How long does a person live? 70 years, 80 years. You're really 120 years. Okay, but that's not forever and ever. So how can King David write a thing which is obviously false? How can King David said, I will praise you forever. I will praise you forever. King David lived only 70 years. What he really thought he was going to live forever, even though it's true, it does says that King David never died. David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. Ella, what does it mean? I will draw down your name. I know lahamshich giloy elokuso, to draw down revealed godliness into the world's mamish. That's what it means. La'olam voed means to the world and lower and lower. La'olam means forever, but it also means to the world. But kedeli yosam shachazu, in order to draw this down, like that's what he said before, God reacts to what we do. In order to draw down this light from the source, it is by means of, first of all, aromimcha. First of all, we have to exalt God. What does it say? How does the sentence go? Look, let's have a look. I will praise you, God, the King, and I will bless your name forever. What does it mean, bless? Bless means to draw down God's name into the world. How do we do that? First of all, we have to elevate. We have to elevate. What is it? What do we elevate? We have to reveal and realize and be aware and to praise God, how high he is. This is Soviet calling how God is above the worlds. Like we see Nasut the Melech, like a king is elevated on the people. This is a surrounding level. Now, nowadays, we got a big problem, and we don't have any kings anymore. I remember Rabbi Mendel Futafas, he was one of my teachers. He had been he was in Siberia, but the communists, they took over in like they really grabbed hold in 1920. But before that, I think in 1917 or something like that, they killed the king of Russia. It was the Tsar. They killed him with his whole family, murdered them all, so that there wouldn't be any more king of Russia. So he said that all the Hasidim were very sad. Why were they sad? He said the king was an evil person. He was not worth anything. But why were they all sad? Because at least there was this idea, people had a thing, there was a king. And Russia was just a king. What was a king? A king, ideally, a king is a person that's totally different from everybody else. Napoleon came along and he sort of wrecked this whole idea of there being a king. He sort of wrecked it. In Russia, that it held on for a while, but even in England, the king is not really a king. Even to this day in England, right, the king is treated like some sort of a special human being. But it used to be a king was like sort of like God. It was a different type of human being. He was the ruler. You didn't question the king, right? God incarnate. There was like the king was sort of untouchable. There was a king. So the king was a human being like everybody else. But the king was like a different type of a king. That's why it says the Mashiach is going to be a king. Melech HaMashiach. It's just a totally different type of human being. It's not going to be like a human being like me and you, but just a lot smarter and a lot holier. A different type of a human being, right? So totally different. His mind is a different mind. Is unquestionable. That was the whole big thing with what Oliver Cromwell, right? You have a little English history. Oliver Cromwell, he killed the king, right? Beheaded the king. I was like, I don't know what beheads the king. The king was corrupt. He was terrible. I tell you, had a king. A king was just a different sort of thing. Says also God is a king. When we say God is a king, that's this aspect of God that he creates everything. He's that's called surrounding the world. It's like a king is above everybody. And from the king is drawn down afterwards that Avracha Shimcha L'Olam Bo'ed. First of all, we exalt God, we make him a king. A melech. And first of all, we have to realize that God is a king, he's incomprehensible. And then we can draw down Avraham, means to draw godliness down forever and ever. That's his level of Mamali calling how God fills the world. That's like what the angels say, that the angels are listening to Kol Divrei Elokim Chaim, Umelech Olam, to the voice of the living God and the king of the world. Call, this is drawing down godliness. God's voice is drawing down, but it comes from the surrounding level of God, which is called the king. Okay, we still haven't touched on original subject, and I don't know if we're ever going to really get to it, but we'll see. Let's try. Namely, why is it that in this week's Torah portion, it starts off talking about Shabbat, and then afterwards it talks about the vessels, and then the temple, the tabernacle. And over there, it talked about the vessels first. And okay, Kamo, just like B'chalalas or B'chayos, Hanimshach, which is drawn down from Ein Sof Baruch Hu, L'chayos Ha'olam was to enliven the worlds. There are two levels, Soviv and Mamali, like we said before. Again, I'm sorry, I just made a mistake. I'm sorry. 3 weeks ago, we learned about making the tabernacle. There it talked about, first of all, vessels, then the building, then Shabbat. Here, when Moses tells it over to the Jewish people, he switches the order of Shabbat and the vessels. Here he puts Shabbat first, then the building, and then vessels last. Right? Why is it over there when God speaks to Moses? He gives the order of the vessels first, and last thing he says is Shabbat. And here, Moses switches the order and he talks about Shabbat first. Okay. Okay, so what's this whole business got to do with us? We Jewish people are chosen. God chose us to do the commandments and to learn his Torah. A non-Jew is not supposed to learn the Torah. He can learn Torah only insofar it is relevant to his what's called 7 Noahide commandments. Okay. The Jewish people, also, how do the Jewish people, we draw godliness down into the world. We keep this whole thing moving, the circulation of godliness in the world is by means of Torah and the commandments. In the Torah and the commandments, we have no idea how important, how vital and necessary is the Torah and the commandments for the whole entire world. The whole entire world. People that have absolutely no idea what is Torah and commandments. I was in China for a while, in China. They have absolutely no idea what are the Jewish people, no idea whatsoever. No, they never heard of such a thing, right? Rare is a Chinaman that heard there's such a thing as Jewish people. The other nations, okay, anyway. Nevertheless, the fact is, Torah and the commandments is what keeps the whole world, including all the China, and everybody, people that have no idea what the animals, the trees, everything, it all depends on Torah and the commandments. You have no idea how tremendously important is the Torah and the commandments. That's one of the reasons why I always see the Jews are in the news, and the Jews, what happens in Israel, Jews, right? The Jews are taking the world, the Jews have how many Jews are there? There's 20 million Jews. There's 8-9 billion people, all the Jews, because the Jews were given the Torah and the commandments. The Yesh Gamken and the Christians have been trying to prove the Torah proves them. The Torah. Leave the Torah alone. What do you care about it? The Hindus care about the Torah. They disprove the Torah. The Torah. The whole Western world knows that the Torah is the truth. And they're trying everything they can for thousands of years just to get the Jews to stop doing the commandments, anything. But the fact of the matter is that the Torah and Jewish people doing the Torah, that's what keeps the whole world going. In Torah and the commandments, learning the Torah and doing the commandments, Yesh Gamkein two levels, these two levels. The commandments, that's what's called the surrounding level. That's surrounding. That's like the garments. By means of the Torah, this is drawn down like the food. It's drawn down inside. What does it mean? The 248 positive commandments, they are called 248 limbs of the king. And also they're called of the king. And also they're called the commandments of the king, the limbs of the king and the commandments of the king. What does it mean, the limbs of the king? Hainu, the commandments. Kamoa aver, just like a limb, a person's hand, foot, is a garment that in this, your hand, in your foot, in your eyes, is your soul has an effect on the world. Shekoach hamaisa, the power of action, which is in your soul, is put in your hands. The power of walking is in your feet. This limb is a vessel and a garment which is united with that aspect of the person, which is in it. Also, the same thing, the 248 limbs of the 248 positive commandments, these are vessels and garments for the infinite light of God, which is drawn into them and through them. Because when a Jew does a commandment, it says, Sum tasim alecha melech, that the Jew puts on himself, he declares that God is a king. What does it mean he declares? He says, he draws down on himself this, what's called the yoke, the connection to the king of the kingship of heaven. I know by means when a Jew does a commandment, this is the commandment of the king. And just like by putting on a talit, what's a talit? How they call it? A prayer shawl. That's what they call it, the prayer shawl. And it has these four corners. There's these strings on the four corners. Well, these strings, putting it on a garment that has four corners, is a commandment. When a Jew puts this commandment on, mamshich, he draws down on himself ol malchuto, a connection to God's kingship. The nimshach, and he becomes what's called a subject of the king. The nimshach, and it's drawn down by means of this hamshacha, a blessing from God, from milamayla mimidas, from God's kingship on his soul. And this is what's called makif. It surrounds him. A person doesn't necessarily feel it, but it's true. That's what it means, put on you a king. Some tasim alecha. The bechin is makif in a surrounding way. This is the garments of the king. When you do a commandment, you draw the garments of the king on you. You become, so to speak, a vessel for God's will, just like your arm is a vessel for your will. Where do I get these things? Here we go. This aspect of God's kingship, this is called the garment of the king. Lavush Malchut. We'll talk about this in the Megillah of Purim. Because it's not like Torah that you understand, that you take inside of your mind and you digest it. The commandments, you don't have to digest anything. You can't really understand what it means. It's God's will. The commandments, mainly that's God's will. The Torah is God's wisdom. Will is a thing which just you command, your arm does it, you don't understand it. This draws down, it doesn't put godliness in the worlds in an inside way. It just is like a surrounding level of godliness that you draw into the world when you do the commandments. When a person does one commandment, as he draws on himself a garment of the king. Sheyeh nimshach alav, that will be drawn to him in a surrounding way. Kamal derech mashal, just like putting on tefillin. When a person puts on tefillin on his arm, and he puts one, what tefillin are, it's a box, which are filled with four parchments, that on these, each one of the parchments is written one of the paragraphs where this commandment appears in the Torah. When a Jew puts one of these boxes on his arm with the parchments in it, and one of them on his head, they have these four paragraphs as he draws on himself the four mochin elyoni. We talked about this, remember before? Last week we talked. This idea of Kadesh, there's two of them, Kadesh L'cha, Kadesh L'kol B'chor. Anyway, the first of the paragraphs, this corresponds to Chachma. This corresponds to Bina. But this is all drawn down in a surrounding way. Because when a person puts on the tefillin that are written with ink, physical ink, this does not go inside of his brain. It's put on his brain. It's put on the head. It doesn't go into a person's mind. Similarly, is all the commandments. The commandments are all what we call surrounding, embracing the person. That's why the commandments are called limbs, just like the limb of a body. When a person grabs on when you hug your friend, or you hold on to one of your friends, you shake his hand, or you hold on to his foot, as what? You can pull the whole person by means of one limb, right? Also, similarly, the idea of the commandments, and the commandments, they're called the 248 limbs of the king, because when a Jew does one of these commandments, he grabs a hold of God, so to speak, and he draws down the whole entirety of God, Orein Sof Baruch Hu, the whole entirety of God. That's what it means. Zeo Aramimcha, I will elevate you, God the King. Elevating God, Romamus, highness, that God surrounds us, he's above us, encompasses us. How is this? By means of the commandments. And by means of this, Avracha, I will draw down your name into an inner way. That's what happens when the Jews do the commandments. That's what it means. V'yas David Shem says that King David made a name for himself. A name for himself means he became famous. He says, no, what he means, he made a name, means he made God's name in the world by means of doing the commandments. He drew down on himself the kingship of God, that God became the king of all the worlds. But this is called makifim. This is the idea of the curtains of the temple. The curtains. The curtains and the pillars, that's what surrounds, that's the building. That's the building of the tabernacle. So now we're starting to understand this, the commandments that we do, this is something like the curtains and the walls of the tabernacle. That's the surrounding aspect. That doesn't go inside. We're going to see the vessels, that's the Torah. The vessels, that's the Torah. What is Shabbat? We're going to see tomorrow, God willing. So what did we learn today? Today we learned a little bit. We're approaching the answer to our question. Why is it that when God commanded Moses to make the tabernacle, first thing he told him was the vessels, then he told him about the curtains and the walls, and then he talked about Shabbat. And when Moses gave it over to the Jews, first thing he talked about Shabbat, then he talked about the curtains and the walls, and then he talked about the vessels. Why? So the Rebbe said, I want to explain this to you in terms that are relevant to us. The curtains and the walls, that is the commandments. The commandments surround us. They encompass us. When we do a commandment, it's like grabbing onto the limb of God. The vessels are going to be the Torah, and that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow.